The lone silhouette of Lillian Harper appeared against the burning sky as she sat upon the weathered church steps, her white wedding gown collecting dust while townsfolk whispered behind cupped hands. The year was 1872, and in the small frontier town of Cottonwood Springs, Wyoming Territory, being left at the altar was as good as wearing a scarlet letter. Lillian stared at her bare finger where a ring should have been. The afternoon sun beat down on her uncovered head, her carefully pinned hair now falling in loose tendrils around her face. 3 hours had passed since the appointed time of her wedding to Edmund Farley, the banker's son who had evidently decided banking and bachelorhood suited him better than marriage. "Miss Harper." A deep voice broke through her thoughts. She looked up, shielding her eyes from the setting sun. A tall man stood before her, hat in hand, his figure backlit by the amber glow. Garrett James was not a frequent visitor to town, preferring the open range to crowded streets, but everyone knew the capable cowboy who worked the Double Circle Ranch 10 miles outside of Cottonwood Springs. "Mr. James," she acknowledged, attempting to maintain dignity despite her humiliation. "Come to witness my shame like everyone else." Garrett shook his head, his sun-bronzed face serious beneath a shock of dark hair. At 32, he had the weathered look of a man who lived by the elements, but his blue eyes held unexpected kindness. "No, madam, I came to town for supplies and heard what happened. Thought you might need a ride home." He gestured to his wagon at the bottom of the steps. Lillian looked past him to where curious onlookers still lingered. The idea of walking through town in her wedding dress was unbearable, but accepting help from a man she barely knew seemed imprudent. Yet something in his straightforward manner gave her comfort. "Thank you, Mr. James." "That would be most appreciated." He offered his hand, calloused and strong, helping her to her feet. As she gathered her skirts, the church door opened behind them. Reverend Thomas stepped out, his face a picture of sympathy. "Miss Harper, I am truly sorry about today's events. If there's anything the church can do, the church has done quite enough," Lillian replied, her voice tight. "You may inform Mr. Farley, should he ever return, that my father will deal with him regarding the wedding expenses." Garrett led her down the steps and helped her into the wagon. As they pulled away, Lillian kept her eyes forward, refusing to acknowledge the stares of the townspeople who had been so eager to attend her wedding and were now equally eager to witness her disgrace. "Where to, Miss Harper?" Garrett asked as they reached the edge of town. "Harper Creek Ranch," she replied. "Though I doubt my welcome will be warm. Father warned me about Edmund's character." The wagon jostled along the rutted road as they headed east out of Cottonwood Springs. The silence between them was broken only by the creak of wheels and the steady clip-clop of the horses' hooves. "For what it's worth," Garrett said finally, "any man who'd leave a woman waiting at the altar isn't worth her tears." Lillian's hands clenched in her lap. "I haven't shed a single tear for Edmund Farley, Mr. James, and I don't intend to start now." Her words were brave, but as they rounded a bend in the road, she turned her face away, blinking rapidly. The bridal veil tucked in her reticule seemed to mock her, a symbol of dreams that had turned to dust in a matter of hours. The sun was low on the horizon when they arrived at Harper Creek Ranch. The modest 2-story house stood surrounded by cottonwood trees, a thin spiral of smoke rising from the chimney. Lillian's father, Howard Harper, stepped onto the porch as the wagon approached, his weathered face hardening at the sight of his daughter returning home in her wedding dress. "So the rumors were true," he said as Garrett helped Lillian down. "I heard in town that Farley boy ran off, left on the morning stage to Denver, they're saying." "Hello to you too, father," Lillian said, squaring her shoulders. Howard looked at Garrett with narrowed eyes. "James, isn't it?" "From the Double Circle?" "Yes, sir, just giving your daughter a ride home." "Well, you've done your good deed. I'll handle things from here." Garrett nodded but hesitated before climbing back into his wagon. "Miss Harper, if you need anything." "Thank you, Mr. James," Lillian said softly. "You've been most kind." As Garrett drove away, Lillian faced her father, preparing for the lecture she knew was coming. Howard Harper was not a cruel man, but he was pragmatic to a fault, and she had defied his judgment regarding Edmund. "I won't say I told you so," Howard said, leading her into the house. "That would be a first," Lillian murmured, removing her gloves. Inside, her younger sister Mary rose from her chair by the fire, her face full of sympathy. "Oh, Lily, I'm so sorry." "Don't fuss, Mary, I'm perfectly fine." Lillian headed for the stairs, desperate for the sanctuary of her bedroom where she could finally let her composed facade crumble. "This isn't just about your pride, Lillian," her father called after her. "That land deal with Farley's father is likely dead now, too. We needed that water access for the east pasture." Lillian stopped, her hand on the banister. "Is that all you care about, the land deal?" Howard sighed, removing his spectacles to rub the bridge of his nose. "Of course not, but you're 24, not some starry-eyed girl. You knew this marriage was advantageous for the ranch as well as for you." "Advantageous?" Lillian laughed bitterly. "Yes, I suppose being married to a man who couldn't even face me on our wedding day would have been very advantageous." She continued up the stairs, closing her bedroom door firmly behind her. Only then did she allow the tears to come, hot and angry, as she tore at the buttons of her wedding dress. 2 weeks passed, and Lillian threw herself into ranch work with a fervor that worried her sister. She rode fence lines, helped with the spring calves, and worked until exhaustion dulled the sting of humiliation. The story of her abandoned wedding had spread throughout the county, embellished with each telling. On a warm May afternoon, Lillian was checking cattle in the north pasture when she spotted a rider approaching. She recognized Garrett James by the way he sat his horse, straight-backed and confident. "Afternoon, Miss Harper," he called, tipping his hat as he drew alongside her. "Mr. James," she acknowledged. "What brings you to Harper Creek?" "Your father hired me to help with the spring roundup. Double Circle can spare me for a few weeks," Lillian frowned. "He didn't mention hiring help," Garrett shrugged. "Decided yesterday, from what I understand." "Said with your brother still away at school in St. Louis, you're short-handed." It was true. Since her brother Daniel had left for school 2 years ago, they'd struggled to keep up with the workload. Still, Lillian couldn't help feeling her father had ulterior motives. "Well, we can certainly use the help," she conceded. "Though I warn you, my father works his hands hard." "I'm not afraid of hard work, Miss Harper." Over the next week, Lillian found herself increasingly aware of Garrett's presence. He worked efficiently and without complaint, even when Howard assigned him the most difficult tasks. He had a quiet way with the horses and cattle, and the other ranch hands respected him. One evening, as Lillian returned from the barn after tending to a sick calf, she found Garrett on the porch, whittling a small piece of wood. "What are you making?" she asked, settling onto the porch step below him. He held up the half-formed carving. "Just a horse, helps me think." "And what are you thinking about, Mr. James?" He set down his knife, studying her face in the fading light. "I was thinking it's not right, the way people in town talk about what happened, as if you were somehow to blame." Lillian looked away, embarrassed. "Gossip is the favorite pastime in Cottonwood Springs. Still, it's not right. Life is rarely fair, Mr. James. I've learned that lesson well these past weeks." Garrett resumed his whittling. "Maybe, but sometimes things that seem like misfortune turn out to be blessings in disguise." Lillian raised an eyebrow. "Are you suggesting being abandoned at the altar was a stroke of good fortune?" "I'm suggesting that marrying the wrong person would have been a far greater tragedy than a day of embarrassment." His words lingered with her as she lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling. For the first time since the wedding that wasn't, she wondered if perhaps her father and Garrett were right, perhaps she had narrowly escaped a lifetime of unhappiness. The next morning brought news that changed everything. A messenger arrived from town with word that Edmund Farley had returned, claiming there had been a misunderstanding and demanding to see Lillian. "He has the audacity to return after 2 weeks," Howard fumed, pacing the kitchen. "What does he expect? That you'll fall into his arms with gratitude. Lillian sat at the table, strangely calm. I want to hear what he has to say. Lillian, her sister began, concern etched on her face. I'm not considering taking him back, Mary, but I deserve an explanation. Howard shook his head. I forbid it. That man has caused enough harm. I'm not asking permission, Father. Lillian stood, her decision made. I'll ride into town this afternoon. As she turned to leave, she nearly collided with Garrett, who had entered through the back door. The look on his face told her he'd heard everything. I need to check on the herd in the south pasture, she said, brushing past him. She was halfway to the barn when she heard footsteps behind her. Miss Harper, Garrett called. Wait. She turned, impatience flashing in her eyes. I've made up my mind, Mr. James. I don't need another man telling me what I should do. I wouldn't presume to tell you anything, he said, but I'd like to ride with you to town if you'll allow it. His offer surprised her. Why? Because a woman shouldn't have to face her demons alone if she doesn't want to. Something in his steady gaze touched her, and she nodded. Very well. We'll leave after lunch. The ride to town was tense, with Lillian rehearsing what she would say to Edmund and Garrett respecting her silence. As they approached Cottonwood Springs, anxiety tightened her chest. What if seeing Edmund awakened feelings she thought she'd buried? They tied their horses outside the hotel where Edmund was staying. Garrett touched her arm lightly before she entered. I'll wait out here. Take all the time you need. Lillian found Edmund in the hotel dining room, looking much as he had when she'd last seen him, handsome in a conventional way, with carefully combed hair and fashionable clothes. He stood as she approached, his expression a practiced mixture of remorse and charm. Lillian, my dear, you look well. I'm not your dear, Edmund. Why did you come back? He gestured to the chair opposite him. Please sit. Let me explain. Against her better judgment, she sat. I panicked, he began, leaning forward earnestly. The weight of commitment, the responsibility, it overwhelmed me, but I've had time to reflect, and I know now what a terrible mistake I made. A mistake, Lillian repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. You left me waiting in a church full of people. You humiliated me and my family. I know, and I can never truly make amends for that. But Lillian, we can still have everything we planned. Father still wants the land deal with your father. We can be married quietly, start fresh. Lillian stared at him, suddenly seeing him with perfect clarity. This isn't about me at all, is it? It's about the land deal. Edmund shifted uncomfortably. Of course it's about you, but the business arrangement is important too. Did your father send you back to salvage the deal? When he didn't immediately deny it, she had her answer. I see. Lillian, be reasonable. Our marriage makes sense. We're both from good families. We're well matched. Well matched, she gave a short laugh. A man who abandons his bride and a woman foolish enough to have nearly married him. Yes, I suppose we deserve each other. Edmund reached for her hand, but she pulled away. I made a mistake. Don't tell me you've never made one. My mistake was trusting you. I won't make it twice. She stood, smoothing her skirt. Goodbye, Edmund. As she walked away, he called after her. Think about your father's ranch. You need that water access. Lillian stepped out onto the hotel porch, blinking in the bright sunlight. Garrett straightened from where he'd been leaning against a post, concern evident in his face. Everything all right? He asked. Perfectly, she replied, surprised to find it was true. Let's go home. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the afternoon sun warm on their backs. Finally, Lillian spoke. He came back because his father sent him. The land deal was falling apart. Garrett nodded. I figured it was something like that. Farley's not the type to admit he was wrong unless there's something in it for him. How would you know? You barely know him. I know enough. Men show their true character in how they treat others when there's nothing to be gained. He glanced at her. You deserve better, Miss Harper. His simple statement touched her more deeply than any of Edmund's elaborate explanations. Thank you, she said softly. As they rode, Lillian felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. She had faced Edmund and found him wanting. The shame she'd carried since the wedding day began to dissipate, replaced by a growing sense of her own worth. When they reached Harper Creek, her father was waiting anxiously on the porch. "Well," he demanded, "what did that scoundrel want?" "To marry me and secure the land deal," Lillian replied, dismounting. "I declined his generous offer." Howard looked torn between pride and concern. "The east pasture will still be there," Lillian interrupted. "We'll find another way to get water access." "I won't marry a man I can't respect, not even for Harper Creek." Her father studied her face, then nodded. "You're right, we'll manage." He turned to Garrett. "Thank you for accompanying my daughter, James." "It was my pleasure, sir." That night, Lillian sat on the porch long after the household had gone to bed. The encounter with Edmund had changed something within her, awakening a determination to chart her own course. She was surprised when the door opened and Garrett stepped out, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. "Thought you might still be up," he said, offering her one. "Thank you." She accepted the cup, moving over to make room for him on the step. "Couldn't sleep. Too many thoughts." He settled beside her, careful to maintain a respectable distance. "You handled yourself well today." Lillian sipped her coffee. "I surprised myself. 2 weeks ago I thought my life was over when Edmund left me at the altar. Now I'm grateful. Life has a way of teaching us what we need to know, even when the lessons are painful." They fell into easy conversation, talking about the ranch, his work at Double Circle, the books they'd read, and their dreams for the future. As the night deepened around them, Lillian realized how comfortable she felt in Garrett's company, how different it was from the nervous awareness she'd always felt with Edmund. Over the following days, their friendship deepened. They worked side by side during the roundup, and Lillian found herself looking forward to their evening conversations on the porch. Garrett was well-read despite his lack of formal education, thoughtful in his opinions and respectful of hers. One afternoon, as they repaired a broken section of fence, a spring thunderstorm rolled in unexpectedly. They sought shelter in an old line shack, arriving just as the heavens opened. "That was close," Garrett said, shaking water from his hat. The small cabin was dusty but dry, with a tiny stove in one corner and a narrow cot along one wall. "Father built this shack when he first claimed this land," Lillian explained, wringing water from her skirt, "before the main house was finished." Garrett busied himself starting a small fire in the stove. "We might be here a while. That's quite a storm." Lillian moved to the single window, watching lightning fork across the darkened sky. "I've always loved storms," she admitted. "The power of them, the way they change everything." Garrett came to stand beside her. "My mother used to say storms clear the air, make way for new beginnings." Their shoulders nearly touched as they stood watching the rain. Lillian was acutely aware of his presence, of the small cabin's intimacy. "Your mother sounds wise," she said. "She was. Died when I was 16. Taught me everything important before she went: how to read, how to treat people right, how to recognize what matters." "And what matters, Mr. James?" He turned to look at her, his eyes serious. "Honesty, kindness, courage. Finding someone who sees you for who you really are." The air between them seemed charged, like the storm outside. Lillian felt herself drawn to him, to his quiet strength, and the respect he'd shown her from the beginning. "I should check if there's any dry wood," he said suddenly, breaking the moment. He moved away, leaving Lillian by the window, her heart beating faster than usual. The storm lasted until dusk, trapping them in the cabin for hours. They talked, sharing stories of their childhoods, their disappointments, their hopes. When the rain finally subsided, Lillian found herself reluctant to leave the cozy shelter and the intimacy it had fostered. As they rode back to the ranch in the gathering twilight, Garrett said, "I'll be heading back to Double Circle soon. The roundup's nearly finished." Lillian felt an unexpected pang of loss. "So soon? Your father only hired me for the roundup." "Of course." She kept her voice neutral. "Well, we've appreciated your help." They rode the rest of the way in silence, but something had shifted between them, a current of unspoken feeling that neither was ready to acknowledge. The next day brought unexpected trouble. A telegram arrived from the bank in Cheyenne. Howard read it with growing alarm. Bad news, Lillian asked as he set it down. The worst. The bank's calling in our loan early. We have 30 days to pay or they'll foreclose. Lillian stared at him, stunned. That's impossible. We've never missed a payment. Apparently there's been a change in bank policy. Howard's expression was grim, but I suspect the Farley's hand in this. Edmund's father sits on the bank's board. This is because I refused Edmund, Lillian realized, cold anger replacing her shock. He's punishing us. It doesn't matter why. What matters is we need to find $5,000 in 30 days, or we lose Harper Creek. The news spread quickly among the ranch hands. That evening, Garrett sought out Lillian as she sat by the creek that gave the ranch its name. I heard about the bank, he said, settling beside her on a flat rock. Is there anything I can do? Lillian shook her head. Unless you have $5,000 hidden in your saddlebags, I don't see what anyone can do. What about selling some cattle early? The spring calves aren't ready and we'd take a loss on the price. Even then, it wouldn't be enough. She picked up a stone and tossed it into the water. The only thing of value we have is the land itself. Garrett was quiet for a moment. What if you had a partner? Someone to invest in Harper Creek. Who would invest in a ranch facing foreclosure? I would. Lillian turned to look at him, thinking he was joking, but his expression was serious. You, she asked. Where would you get that kind of money? I've been saving for years to buy my own place. I have nearly 4,000 set aside. It's not enough on its own, but with what your father could raise by selling some cattle. Why would you do that? You hardly know us. Garrett met her gaze steadily. I know enough. That simple statement echoed his words from days earlier. Lillian felt a surge of emotion, gratitude, confusion, and something deeper she wasn't ready to name. I can't ask you to risk your savings on our problems. You didn't ask, I offered. He stood, extending his hand to help her up. Just think about it, talk to your father. Howard was skeptical when Lillian relayed Garrett's offer. Why would he put his money into our ranch? What's in it for him? A partnership, he says. He's always wanted his own place. There are cheaper ranches than Harper Creek, even with our troubles. Lillian couldn't meet her father's searching gaze. Perhaps he sees potential here. Or perhaps he sees something else entirely, Howard mused. I've noticed how he looks at you, Lily. Her cheeks warmed. Don't be ridiculous, father. Mr. James is just being kind. MMM. Howard didn't look convinced. Well, kind or not, we should consider his offer. It might be our only chance to save the ranch. The next day, Howard invited Garrett to dinner to discuss terms. The conversation was businesslike, with Howard outlining what partnership would mean: equal say in ranch decisions, shared profits, shared work. I understand, Garrett said. I'm not looking for charity. I want to build something worthwhile. And if things don't work out, Howard pressed. Partnerships can sour. Then we'd find a fair way to dissolve it. I'd want everything in writing, same as you. Howard nodded, satisfied. We'll ride to town tomorrow, talk to the lawyer about drawing up papers. As Garrett prepared to leave that evening, Lillian walked him to the porch. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. Thank you, she said simply. Even if it doesn't work out, the fact that you offered means a great deal. It will work out, he assured her. Harper Creek is worth saving. Their eyes met in the dim light from the window, and Lillian felt that same current between them, stronger now. Garrett, she said, using his first name for the first time. Why are you really doing this? And please don't say it's because you see potential in the ranch. He stepped closer, his voice low. Because I see potential in us, Lillian, in what we could build together, not just a ranch, but a life. The admission hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Lillian's heart raced, but before she could respond, the door opened behind them, and Mary called that their father needed help with his accounts. Tomorrow, Garrett said, stepping back. We'll talk more tomorrow. The next day, Garrett and Howard rode to town to meet with the lawyer. Lillian busied herself with chores, her mind replaying Garrett's words from the previous night. Was it possible she had found something real so soon after her disastrous almost wedding? When the men returned, Howard looked more optimistic than he had in weeks. The papers are being drawn up. We'll sign tomorrow. Mr. James here is officially going to be my partner, assuming the bank accepts our payment. They will, Garrett said confidently. I'll wire for my savings to be transferred from the bank in Colorado today. That evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink, Garrett found Lillian in the garden behind the house. "Would you walk with me?" he asked. They strolled toward the creek, the air fragrant with spring blossoms and new grass. When they reached the water's edge, Garrett turned to face her. "I meant what I said last night, Lillian. My interest in Harper Creek isn't just about land or cattle." "I know," she said softly, "and I'm grateful but also afraid. Afraid of what? Of making another mistake, of trusting too easily." Garrett took her hands in his. "I'm not Edmund Farley. I won't make promises I can't keep. All I can offer is my word that I'll always be honest with you, always respect you, and always put your happiness alongside my own." His sincerity moved her deeply. This was so different from Edmund's practiced charm, so much more real. "I believe you," she said. "But we've known each other such a short time. Time isn't always the best measure. Sometimes you just know when something is right." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object. "I made this for you." It was the wooden carving she'd seen him working on, a beautifully detailed horse, small enough to fit in the palm of her hand. As she turned it over, she saw he had carved her initials into the base. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "I'm not asking for promises, Lillian. Just a chance to show you who I am, to build something together, the ranch, and maybe, in time, more." In that moment, looking into his eyes, Lillian felt the last of her doubts melt away. She had been rushing toward the wrong future with Edmund. With Garrett, she wanted to savor each step of the journey. "I'd like that," she said simply. The next week was a flurry of activity as they prepared to make the bank payment. Garrett's money arrived, Howard sold enough cattle to make up the difference, and together they saved Harper Creek from foreclosure. Word spread quickly about the new partnership and about Garrett and Lillian's growing closeness. Some gossiped that she had rebounded too quickly, while others commented on how well-suited they seemed. Lillian found she no longer cared what people thought. She knew her own heart. As spring gave way to summer, Harper Creek Ranch flourished under the combined efforts of Howard and Garrett. Lillian watched with pride as the man she was coming to love poured himself into the land she had always called home, making improvements, working tirelessly, treating the hands with respect. On a warm evening in late June, Garrett asked Lillian to ride with him to a hillside overlooking the ranch. As their horses picked their way up the gentle slope, the setting sun painted the valley in gold, the creek a silver ribbon winding through green pastures. At the top, they dismounted and stood side by side, taking in the view. "It's beautiful," Lillian said. "I've always loved this spot." "I can see why." Garrett turned to her, taking her hands in his. "Lillian, these past months have been the happiest of my life. Working alongside you, getting to know you, I've fallen in love with you." Though she had suspected his feelings, hearing the words spoken aloud made her heart soar. "I love you too, Garrett." His smile was radiant as he reached into his pocket. "I know it might seem soon, and I don't want to rush you after what happened with Edmund, but I know what I want." He opened his hand to reveal a simple gold ring. "Will you marry me, Lillian? Not for the ranch, not for convenience, but because I want to spend my life with you." Tears of joy filled her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into his arms for a tender kiss that held all the promise of their future together. 2 months later, on a perfect September morning, the townsfolk of Cottonwood Springs gathered once again at the church. This time, however, Lillian Harper walked confidently down the aisle to where Garrett James waited for her, his eyes filled with love. As she reached him, the minister prepared to begin the ceremony, but Garrett held up his hand. "If you'll indulge me," he said quietly, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a length of soft, braided rope, the kind cowboys used for their most delicate work. A murmur of confusion rippled through the congregation. "Lillian sat with no ring once before," Garrett said, his voice carrying clearly through the church. Today, I offer not just a ring but a binding of our lives together." He took one end of the rope and wrapped it gently around Lillian's wrist, then the other end around his own, their hands joined between them. "In the traditions of the West," he continued, "a man's word is his bond, and a rope like this one can be a lifeline, a tool for work, or a connection between two beings who trust each other. Today, it represents the connection between us, flexible yet strong, able to weather all seasons." Lillian's eyes shone with tears as she understood the beautiful symbolism of his gesture. Where once she had sat abandoned, now she stood bound by love to a man whose character had proven true. The minister, touched by the unorthodox addition, proceeded with the ceremony. When it came time to exchange rings, Garrett carefully unwound the rope, tucking it into his pocket before sliding the gold band onto Lillian's finger to join her engagement ring. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." As they walked back down the aisle together, Lillian caught sight of Edmund Farley at the back of the church, his expression unreadable. She felt no anger, no regret, only gratitude for the path that had led her to true happiness. That evening, as the wedding celebration continued at Harper Creek Ranch, Lillian and Garrett slipped away to the porch, seeking a moment of quiet together. "Happy, Mrs. James?" Garrett asked, his arm around her waist. "Completely," she replied, leaning into him. "Though I was surprised by your rope ceremony. Where did you learn that?" "I made it up," he admitted with a smile. "But it felt right. A rope can save a life out here, and you, Lillian, you saved mine in a way I hadn't even realized I needed saving." She turned in his arms to face him. "We saved each other." As the stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky, Lillian knew with absolute certainty that this was where she belonged, not bound by convention or expectation, but by love freely given and received. The road ahead would have its challenges, but they would face them together, their lives intertwined like the strands of Garrett's rope, creating something stronger than either could be alone.